All right, so strap yourselves in, folks, because this deep dive is a real doozy. We're going deep into the twisted world of Henry Lee Lucas.
You know him, right? The guy who confessed to, like, hundreds of murders.
Yeah, claimed to be one of the most prolific serial killers in history. But here's the catch. A lot of those confessions, well, let's just say they've been seriously challenged.
Oh, yeah, big time. So that's the question, isn't it? How many murders did Lucas actually commit?
That's what we're going to try to figure out.
And let me tell you, it's a puzzle with a lot of dark and disturbing pieces. We've got excerpts from Henry Lee Lucas' Death, Mother, and Murders, for starters.
Oh, and his Wikipedia page, of course.
Naturally. Plus, a decision from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals.
And to really round things out, we've got some background on Arctis Tool,
Lucas's partner in crime, from his Wikipedia entry.
It's going to be a wild ride through a very troubled life. And fair warning, some of the details are pretty rough.
Oh yeah, no sugarcoating here.
Let's start with Lucas's childhood. Talk about a textbook case of how a messed up upbringing can really screw a person up.
Blacksburg, Virginia. Poverty. Abuse. You name it, he probably experienced it.
His mother, Viola, man, what a nightmare she seems to have been.
From what we've gathered, pure evil. Forced him to wear girls' clothes, introduced him to some pretty dark stuff.
Like satanic rituals?
Allegedly, yeah. And the abuse, constant, both physical and emotional. It's no surprise this guy ended up with issues.
Low IQ, epilepsy, diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. It all adds up.
Well, those early experiences definitely could have contributed to his later problems, no doubt about it.
That whole antisocial personality disorder thing gets thrown around a lot. What does it actually mean for someone like Lucas?
Well, think about it like this. Disregard for social norms, a serious lack of empathy. It's the kind of stuff that can easily lead to impulsive and even criminal behavior.
So in Lucas's case, it's like he had zero remorse for his actions.
Exactly. Disturbing ability to detach himself from all the suffering he caused. Like it didn't even matter to him.
That's chilling. And when you look at his first confirmed murder, it just cements that image of him as a truly heartless individual.
1960, he's 23 years old. And who does he kill? His own mother.
Stabbed her in the neck during an argument.
Yep, then took off, got caught, obviously, sent to prison. But that was just the beginning of his long and twisted journey through the justice system.
Escaped, got recaptured.
Multiple times, even spent some time at Ionia State Hospital in Michigan.
Ionia? Wasn't that where they used to do all those electroshock therapy treatments?
Yep, that's the one. Lucas got a heavy dose of that, plus a ton of antidepressants.
Electroshock therapy, that sounds pretty intense. What were they even hoping to achieve with that?
Well, back then, it was a common way to treat all sorts of mental illnesses. Controversial, but common.
So for Lucas, were they trying to, zap away his depression?
Probably. Maybe even hoping to curb some of his violent tendencies, but who knows what the long-term effects really were.
Especially back then, right?
Exactly. The science wasn't exactly advanced, could have done more harm than good, who knows?
So did it work? Did it change him at all?
It's tough to say. What we do know is that after he got out, in 1970, Lucas's life took another dark turn.
And that's where Arctis Tool enters the picture, right?
Win and go. Another name you'll find in the True Crime Hall of Fame, or should I say, Hall of Infamy.
Met at a soup kitchen in Jacksonville, Florida, if I remember correctly.
Got it. And that's when their twisted little bond really took root. A match made in, well, you know.
And according to Tool, their partnership led to a horrifying cross-country killing spree.
Leaving a trail of victims wherever they went. They even tried to claim they were part of a cult called the Hands of Death.
But the police didn't buy it.
Not a shred of evidence to support that. Probably just a way to make themselves sound more scary or shift the blame.
Right, it wasn't us, it was the cult. Classic.
But you know what's interesting? Some of their confessions actually did stick. Led to actual convictions.
Which just makes the whole thing even more complicated, right?
It sure does. But then, 1983 rolls around. Lucas gets busted again. Weapons charge this time. And that's when things get really, really strange.
The infamous confession spree.
It's like he became a confessional clearinghouse for all these unsolved cases. Investigators were practically tripping over themselves to get him to confess.
Anything to close those cases, right?
Exactly. And it's almost like they encouraged him to keep going, even when his stories became totally outlandish.
Some people even said Lucas was being fed information about cases.
Oh yeah, those rumors were swirling, like they were trying to make his confessions fit the facts.
That's messed up. Talk about manipulating a confession.
It really makes you question the whole system, doesn't it? Were they actually searching for the truth? Or just desperate for any kind of closure, even if it meant bending the rules.
So with all these confessions flying around, how do you even begin to separate fact from fiction?
That's where the Lucas report comes in. Someone finally decided to compare his confessions to actual records of his whereabouts. And
Let's just say there were a lot of inconsistencies.
enough to throw pretty much all of his confessions into question.
You got it.
I read that even Texas Attorney General Jim Maddox got involved, publicly criticized the officials who'd cleared cases based on Lucas's word.
Called it a hoax. Said they were just trying to sweep all those unsolved cases under the rug.
Not exactly a glowing endorsement of the investigation, to say the least. So if we strip away all those iffy confessions, what are we left with?
11 murders that he was actually convicted of.
11. That's a far cry from the hundreds he claimed.
It is, but it's still a significant number.
Especially when you consider who those victims were. His mother, Viola, his common-law wife, Becky Powell, and that unidentified woman who became known as Orange Socks.
Each case, its own set of chilling details.
Let's talk about those cases, about the victims, and about all those lingering questions that still surround Henry Lee Lucas's reign of terror. Because even with the confirmed convictions, there's a lot we still don't know, a lot of shadows still lurking in this story. Oh, absolutely. And some of those shadows might never fully lift. It's like trying to navigate through a maze, you know, trying to follow Lucas's path. He was all over the place, left behind a whole trail of potential victims, but actually proving anything, man, that's tough.
And that's what makes this case so unsettling. These are real people, real lives lost. And for so many of them, there may never be any real answers. It's got to be hard for the families not knowing.
It is. Every victim deserves a thorough investigation, you know? And for some, that closure just might never come. Like Marie Petriheiser, for example, Townsend, Delaware, summer of '77.
What happened?
Gruesome discovery. Detectives found her remains in a wooded area off Old Union Church Road, lying in an open field, just left there. She was 50 years old.
It's the kind of scene that just sticks with you, doesn't it? Knowing there was a struggle, she fought back. Blunt force trauma to the head. It's brutal. Makes you wonder what kind of person could do something like that.
That's the question that haunts every investigator. And in this case, all signs pointed to Henry Lee Lucas.
Why? Was he in the area?
Oh, yeah. At the time of the murder, he was living in Elkton, Maryland. Just a hop, skip, and a jump from where they found Heiser's body.
It's like one of those breadcrumb trails.
Yeah.
You follow it, hoping it leads somewhere, but you never know for sure.
Right. And then you've got these eerie similarities between Lucas's own writings and the crime scene. It's enough to make you think maybe this is another piece of the puzzle falling into place.
It makes sense to look into it, for sure. But like a lot of cases connected to Lucas, the proof just isn't there.
You're left with this nagging suspicion, but no real resolution. Frustrating, especially for those who want justice for Marie Petriheiser.
And we can't forget about Stella Ellen McLean. Disappeared from a restaurant in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, back in '78. Another victim. Another mystery.
And another example of how Lucas was always on the move, drifting from place to place, leaving a trail of potential victims.
What happened to McLean?
They found her body months later, hundreds of miles away, near Interstate 25 in Platte County, Wyoming. No head. She'd been raped and strangled. Just terrific.
The not knowing, not even having all of her remains. It's just awful.
Absolutely tragic. And then, in '84, an investigator from Scotts Bluff County decided to interview Lucas about McLean's murder.
Did he confess?
He gave some compelling testimony, enough to suggest he was involved, but was it the truth? Or is this another one of his manipulations? Who knows?
It's the million-dollar question with him, right? Was there any physical evidence to support his claims? Or was it all just talk?
That's the problem, isn't it? Physical evidence is what you need to back up a confession. And in so many cases linked to Lucas, it's just not there. Leaves you in this weird limbo. You suspect him, but can't really prove it.
We see that same pattern over and over again.
Right.
Like in Grand Island, Nebraska, with Janet Lee Callies. She vanished from a bar near Interstate 80 in '78. Lucas said he did it. Even gave specific details, like how Callies had 3 kids.
But details can be found, stories can be made up. If there's no hard proof, it's all just smoke and mirrors.
It makes you wonder if he was involved somehow, but maybe his memory's just messed up. Or is he just making it all up? It's tough to say.
That's the Lucas enigma, isn't it? The debate rages on. Was he a brilliant liar playing the system? Or was there some truth buried in all those lies?
Speaking of complex cases and shaky confessions, we can't talk about Lucas without mentioning Adam Walsh.
Oh, man, that case. A real tragedy. The nation was glued to the news, everyone hoping they'd find that little boy.
6 years old. Vanished from a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida back in '81.
A massive search, but all they ever found was Adam's severed head. Just horrible.
The thought of that, what that poor child went through, it just breaks your heart. And then to have the evidence mishandled, it adds insult to injury.
It's like the system failed Adam and his family, and it's another layer of tragedy on top of an already unbearable situation. And then, of course, Lucas throws his hat into the ring.
Saying he was there when it happened, backing up Toole's confession.
Again, can you ever really trust anything Lucas says?
It's impossible to know for sure.
Even with Toole's confession and Lucas chiming in, there's just no physical evidence. Plus, they lost all that key evidence early on. The whole investigation is just shrouded in doubt.
The case is still debated today, isn't it? Shows you the power of unanswered questions, especially when a young life is taken so brutally. But Adam Walsh's case did change things for the better, right?
Absolutely. It really forced law enforcement to rethink how they handled missing children cases. All that public outcry, the media attention, it sparked a national conversation. Child safety, prevention, more coordinated efforts to find missing kids.
So even though they may never definitively solve Adam's case, it did bring out some positive change.
It's a tragic legacy, but an important one.
Let's move on to another case where it's hard to separate fact from fiction. Cheryl Ann Scherer's murder in Scott City, Missouri.
This one takes us back to '79. 19-year-old girl working at a gas station just vanishes. Poof, gone.
It's every parent's worst nightmare. You think about the fear, the not knowing what happened.
Both Toole and Lucas claimed they were responsible. Said they had abducted and murdered a young woman in that area around the same time that Scherer disappeared.
Did you check out?
Nope. They couldn't find any solid evidence to link them to her. They couldn't even prove for sure that the victim they were talking about was even Cheryl Ann Scherer.
So were they lying? Or were they just, as they sometimes claimed, having trouble remembering the details correctly?
It's a good question, especially considering what they found out later.
What's that?
It turns out both Toole and Lucas, along with Toole's niece and nephew, were actually in Scott City when Scherer disappeared.
So they were there, but still no concrete evidence to connect them to the crime. It's another one of those tantalizing leads that just leads to a dead end.
Exactly. Another victim, another family left wondering what really happened.
It's like a recurring theme with Lucas. Wherever he went, mystery followed.
Like with the Grimes County Jane Doe.
Remind me about that one.
1981, Iola, Texas. They found a woman's body wrapped in a plastic bag. Blunt force trauma to the head. They never identified her.
It's sad, These are real people with lives, with families who miss them, and they're just reduced to a case file, a Jane Doe.
It really shows you the human cost of all this.
Yeah.
And Lucas, he confessed, of course.
Of course he did.
Said he drove the victim to Texas from Durham, North Carolina, even thought her name might have been Cheryl.
Was Toole involved too?
Oh, yeah. According to Lucas, Toole was there. Said Toole beat her in the head with a tire iron while Lucas strangled her.
But the confession doesn't really add up, does it?
Not really. Lucas said he strangled her, but the autopsy showed she died from blunt force trauma.
Makes sense if Toole really did beat her with a tire iron.
And while Lucas led police to the general area where they found the body, he couldn't say exactly where it was. Another case where the evidence doesn't quite line up with what he's saying.
So what are we supposed to believe? Was he involved somehow, but his memory is just foggy? Or was he making the whole thing up?
Tough to say. The Grimes County Jane Doe case remains unsolved, like so many others linked to Lucas.
It's almost like he's taunting us from beyond the grave.
In a way, yeah. But you know what? It forces us to think about these bigger issues. How reliable is memory, really? Why would someone confess to a crime they didn't commit?
And how much can we trust what people tell us, especially when they have something to gain?
Exactly. It's a reminder that the truth can be a slippery thing. And sometimes justice is just out of reach. But we have to keep searching for it anyway.
I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to discuss. More cases, more victims, and the larger question of what Henry Lee Lucas's legacy really is. After all that, it's hard to escape the feeling that we've only just scratched the surface of this whole Henry Lee Lucas thing. We talked about the man, his crimes, the victims, all those lingering questions. But there's something bigger at play here, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about individual victims and families. The Lucas case really shook up the entire criminal justice system.
Big time. It forced everyone to face some hard truths about how they do things, like how much can we really trust confessions?
Exactly. And how far are investigators willing to go to close a case? Are they sometimes too focused on getting those answers, maybe even overlooking the truth in the process?
Kind of scary when you think about it. This guy, Lucas, he was able to manipulate the system. Confessed to all these crimes, probably most of them he didn't even commit. Makes you wonder, if it could happen then, could it happen again?
It's a valid question. It really highlights the importance of doing things by the book. Rigorous investigations, making sure those confessions are legit, not just taking someone's word for it, especially when they might have a reason to lie.
It's like a wake-up call for everyone involved, right? Every case, every victim deserves a fair shot.
Absolutely. You can't sacrifice due process just for the sake of closure. And the Lucas case, it was a huge wake-up call. I mean, think about it. It forced law enforcement to reevaluate everything, how they interrogate suspects, how they handle confessions, the whole 9 yards. And they started putting more emphasis on finding that physical evidence, which is key.
So even though Lucas's crimes were horrific, his case did lead to some positive changes.
No doubt about it. It sparked a lot of important discussions about how to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. And those conversations are still happening today. Forensic science is always evolving, investigative techniques are getting more sophisticated, and we're constantly learning new things about human behavior.
It's an ongoing process, that's for sure. But before we wrap this up, let's talk about what happened to Lucas himself. He was originally on death row for killing Orange Sox. But then, in '98, Texas Governor George W. Bush commuted his sentence to life in prison.
Yeah, that was a controversial move. A lot of people were outraged. Victims' families, the public, they felt like he deserved to die for what he did.
Others felt like life in prison was a more fitting punishment, especially with all the doubts surrounding those confessions. It's a tough call, no easy answers.
It really highlights that whole debate about the death penalty, doesn't it? It's a complex issue, lots of different viewpoints.
And for Lucas, being in prison took on a whole new meaning, supposedly. He said he'd found God, converted to Christianity. Some people thought it was just another act, a way to manipulate people, get some sympathy.
Who knows? It's hard to say what was really going on in his head.
Either way, his story still has that power to fascinate and disturb people. He died in 2001, natural causes. But his legacy, that's a whole other story.
What about Toole, though? What happened to him?
Oh, he died in prison a few years earlier, 1996. Cirrhosis got him. His life was messed up from the start, just like Lucas's. Poverty, abuse, probably some serious mental illness in there too.
It's a sad reminder that violence often starts in the home. Trauma, neglect, these things have long-lasting effects. If we want to prevent future tragedies, we need to understand where it all begins.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the gruesome details, the shock value of these cases. But it's important to remember that these were real people, shaped by their experiences. Doesn't excuse what they did, of course, but it helps us understand the bigger picture.
Definitely. So where does that leave us? Did Lucas really kill hundreds of people, like he said? Or was he just a master manipulator confessing to crimes he had nothing to do with? We'll probably never know for sure.
That's the thing about these cases. They stick with you, all those unanswered questions. But even if we never find all the answers, just the act of searching for them, digging into the evidence, trying to make sense of it all, that's important. It's about honoring the victims, trying to find some justice for them, and learning from the past so we can do better in the future.
You said it. The Lucas case is a stark reminder that justice is a never-ending pursuit. It takes constant effort, honesty, and a dedication to uncovering the truth, no matter how difficult that might be.
Well, folks, we hope you found this deep dive into the life and crimes of Henry Lee Lucas informative, maybe even a little bit creepy. If you're hungry for more info, want to dig into specific cases, or explore the mysteries surrounding Lucas and Toole, there's a ton of stuff out there online.
Just type in Henry Lee Lucas victims or oddest Toole confessions, and you'll find all sorts of rabbit holes to go down.
So keep those brains working, folks. And remember, sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.